So our next presentation is Students as Producers in Action, Experience from the Access to Justice Fellowship. We've got 5 presenters, 5 co-presenters, PCLL students from Hong Kong University and CUHK, Acacia Chan, Celine Chan, George Ho, Jaime Wong, and Michelle Wong. So over to you.
Great, thank you. So hi everyone, we are the Access to Justice Fellowship, and we will be talking about student producers in action. So allow me again to first introduce our team members really quick. Yep, so I'm Jaime, this is Celine, we have George, Acacia, and Michelle, and we have just currently, we've just completed our PCLL program at HKU and CUHK just last month actually. And today we'll be bringing you through our presentation about our Access to Justice Fellowship. We'll give an overview of our program. We'll talk a bit about how our fellowship program actually addresses some of the shortcomings in the current legal education system in Hong Kong. We'll then move on to talk a bit about our team as student producers. And finally, we'll talk a bit about a new model that we would like to propose for student producer programs in local universities. Yeah. So our Access to Justice Fellowship is an annual program which aims to build sustainable partnerships in public interest law between the legal and NGO sectors so we can tackle barriers to access to justice. And we do this by placing law graduates in our partnering NGOs for up to 10 months to undertake quasi-legal capacity building projects to build the NGO's legal capacity. And so this is a model that I'm sure is quite familiar to a lot of you in the room. For example, the Equal Justice Works Fellowship or the Skadden Fellowships in the US, which have been quite popular and successful. And so we're adapting this model to Hong Kong's legal landscape so that we can promote a wider public interest law mindset amongst our sector. And so through our research, we identified 5 main problems, as you can see on the slide. And in response to these problems, even though our fellow won't be giving any strict direct legal advice because of some of the regulatory prohibitions in Hong Kong, they'll be working on some capacity building projects, such as developing a case database, providing legal education to the NGO staff and also its beneficiaries, and also conducting research for policy and advocacy purposes. And so we hope that some of these skills and these projects can be integrated in the NGOs and allow it to become a lot more self-sustainable so that the NGO can continue to make use of this training even after the fellow leaves and won't be as reliant on having lawyers.
So the Access to Justice Fellowship not only addresses the problems faced by NGOs, but also the shortcomings in legal education. As A2J fellows would be fresh law graduates, so they would have first-hand experience in legal education and their shortcomings. First of all, clinical education is effective in training up students' soft skills through knowledge application. However, recent studies pointed out that Hong Kong law graduates lack an expanded worldview and that clinical legal education initiatives in Hong Kong were limited in scale. So one of the many reasons is that, as Jaime said, Hong Kong has a very strict regulatory regime. Law schools must partner with qualified lawyers who are covered under an indemnity scheme in order to set up a legal clinic, which requires a lot of resources and therefore limited clinical learning opportunities were available for law students. You can read more about this issue in the blog post written by one of us via the QR code on the corner. Secondly, law students themselves also find that there are not enough opportunities in law schools to explore public interest law. Without the actual experiences in the actual context, law students could only tell you vaguely how law impacts grassroots communities. So the feeling of lack of opportunities to explore and the lack of career options, most students chase after training contracts as international commercial firms. And even if these students go on to do pro bono work as qualified lawyers, they may not be able to see the big picture of the problems these communities are actually facing. So therefore, A2J Fellowship is designed in a way to encourage students and graduates to become producers. To us, producers means to accurately identify issues by doing thorough research, and then to come up with innovative solutions that address the issues, and in a way that gives voice to those in need. Producers will also be active learners and simultaneously contribute to society in a meaningful way. The fellow would be given the opportunity to interact with service targets to get their hands on the administrative aspect of case management. They would also gain knowledge in public interest law and can explore firsthand the legal issues faced by grassroots communities, and thereby expanding their worldview. In the long run, we hope the experience could give the fellow a taste of working in public interest law and to know that they have choices apart from the conventional career options. We hope that more lawyers will realize that we not only need more pro bono work, but actually more legal practitioners focusing on serving these communities.
So now moving on to the question of what motivates us. We received legal education both in Hong Kong and the UK, and what we collectively recognize, and as previously mentioned, is that students are not given many opportunities, nor is there an adequate environment that encourages students to take legal education into their own hands. And what brought us together was the 2019 PELNet Law for Change student competition, which allowed us to reflect on our role as students, future lawyers, and also members of society. Particularly in relation to the A2J Fellowship, a chat with Professor Lindsay Ernst from HKU inspired us to look into the legal needs faced by NGOs. And in conducting more research, we spoke to over 12 NGOs, 7 law firms, and 3 academics, including Professor Michael Ramsden of CUHK and Ms. Darcy Davidson Roberts from HKU, to better understand the access to justice landscape in Hong Kong. These academics have also provided valuable guidance in our project, including helping us structure our fellowship and connected us with NGOs so that we can learn from their experiences. What motivates us as student producers is to bring our fellowship to fruition is our goal to do our part in reducing the gaps in the legal landscape of Hong Kong. Each time we talk to an NGO, we see the shortcomings in how the legal system could be serving grassroots communities, and we hope to contribute what we can. Now, moving on to what we have learned. Often our legal education is centered around legal concepts and theories, but we hardly are exposed to the law's application in real life. In the 8 months since we began this journey as student producers, we learned many things which we did not come across in our 4 to 5 years of formal legal education. And this includes, firstly, how the law actually impacts grassroots communities. For example, in law school, we've learned that the labor tribunal's procedures are designed to help underprivileged communities by barring legal representation. But nowhere was there any mention of the pressure these employees face when they have to go to court alone, and the constant pressures asserted by the presiding officer for them to settle their claims. This association of what should have happened and what is actually happening motivates us to carry on with our project. George, who will be speaking next, has written a blog post reflecting his experience on this, which you can take a look at by scanning the QR code. He has also shared his observations in his alternative dispute resolution class, revealing that the lessons learned can also benefit the peers of any such student producers. Secondly, we've also learned how to put our legal skills and knowledge into practice. For example, as part of establishing our fellowship, we had to go through many legal procedures such as incorporation and drafting memorandums of understanding with our partnering NGOs. In our legal education, we did take courses like corporate and commercial transactions and legal drafting, etc. And it is very exciting to put this skill set into use. Further, we have also received much appreciated pro bono help from law firms, and this continues to help strengthen our knowledge in this respect. Thirdly, beyond practical legal skills, our journey as student producers has also developed our soft skills, including pitching, conferencing, and writing proposals. And lastly, we've also learned a lot of language that is used in social innovation projects. For example, we learned how to define the impact of our project using figures such as the social economic value in a camp, thus highlighting the importance in creating a healthy environment that encourages students to explore how they could become producers.
Now we will move on to talk about what can be learned from our project and be applied into legal education. You may wonder at this juncture whether our project actually fits within the traditional understanding of students as producer. But we hope to demonstrate with our project that there can be a new model for how student producers programs can be run in university. A typical student producers program would be organized by an academic. Students are encouraged to produce research results within the defined scope of production provided by the leading academic. However, our project suggests that instead of students joining a course and producing something for that course, students could be the one initiating the project with no fixed scope as a restriction. Students could be encouraged to pitch ideas to the faculty, and we'll hope that the faculty would be able to provide 5 modes of support. First, inspiration, which is illustrated by the role Professor Ernst in Hong Kong U played in our project. Secondly, drawing like-minded students together, which is a role played by PeelNet, student competition in our project. Third, providing the connections and guidance so that the students can refine and further develop their project, which is the roles played by Darcy and Professor Ramsden in our project. And lastly, also funding for the student producers so that they can carry on with the project. And there are several distinct benefits for adopting this model for a student producer program. First, such a model is truly student-led. Students initiate the projects and own the project. They can engage in issues that they are genuinely interested in, rather than producing some research material simply because they sign up for a certain course. Having students lead also allows them to develop the soft skills that are much needed when they enter into the legal profession. And say if this fellowship program was run by an academic and we were merely assisting, we probably would not be here sharing our initiatives in this conference. Secondly, universities can offer the 5-fold support we mentioned in collaboration with other organizations like NGOs and the legal profession. And in our project, that is PeelNet and a number of law firms guiding us in our process. And that is in line with the idea that academics should go out and engage members of the civil communities through collaboration. And this is in line with this trend and also this model allows for this flexibility. Third, the nature of project doesn't have to be limited to research or knowledge production, but also knowledge application, which in our case would be through the fellow applying the knowledge in managing cases at the NGOs, and also knowledge transmission, which in our fellowship would be through educating grassroots communities and staff at a partnering NGO. We hope that our project can provide a blueprint for how a student producer program may be run in university as part of the formal curricula in the future.
Before we end the presentation, we would like to reflect on how we think law schools can better support student producers. Firstly, to incorporate opportunities to develop student-led initiatives in the curriculum by having more competitions and invitations for students to really pitch new ideas for events, because that would encourage students to develop an innovative entrepreneurial mindset and will encourage them to really identify areas that they think need addressing in society and find the gaps that the students can come in and step in to help. And these student-led programs can even be incorporated as part of the actual curriculum. Secondly, to foster an environment where students are actively encouraged to apply the legal knowledge learned within the local community. And this goes hand in hand with what was previously said. So for example, more clinical courses can be established for law grads to do pro bono work for grassroots communities. Thirdly, providing mentorship and guidance for student projects. As student producers, we've never faced a lot of the challenges that we are facing, and student producers would definitely appreciate any guidance from people who have more experience or have been through this themselves. Fourthly, to make more funding opportunities available and to publicize them more. A lot of student projects cannot come to fruition without financial support. And for example, with our fellowship, we're currently trying to fundraise 500,000 Hong Kong dollars for our inaugural fellowship, and would appreciate more information about funding opportunities from our universities. And lastly, advocacy for a less strict regulatory regime for law students and NGOs within Hong Kong. Currently, as mentioned previously, the regulatory regime in Hong Kong means that a solicitor must be employed by a law firm in Hong Kong in order to provide legal advice. And therefore, those who are in NGOs, even if they are legally trained, cannot actually provide such legal advice. Of course, there are benefits to this in protecting those people who are actually receiving such advice, but there are still in society many people who are unable to access justice. And perhaps there is a role to be played by legally trained individuals who aren't tied to a specific firm. For example, like what is done in the US. And investigations into such a proposal may benefit Hong Kong in the long run. And that actually concludes our presentation. Thank you so much for listening. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the following Q&A session.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was a fascinating and very interesting presentation. So now, could I invite questions? Just while we're waiting for some questions to come through, I mean, I've got several really. And one of those questions is about the idea of mentorship. About mentorship. So you say that having academic staff mentor you. I mean, what was your experience? What makes for useful mentoring in this context?
So we actually had a number of mentors throughout our process. At the very beginning, when we joined PUNES student competition, that is where we met. We were partnered with David's Pope offered help to mentor us, so we meet with them like every 2 weeks. They challenge us on some legal aspects and more technical aspects and help us mold our idea. And I think those challenging questions, challenging our idea as to whether it will actually work is very helpful. And then moving on, when we actually try to implement our projects, we have a lot of mentors, like, as you mentioned, Darcy, who helped us structure one of the fellowship program with the labor organization and connecting us with NGOs so we can learn from their experiences. I think providing these sorts of connections and with that for the academics sharing their own experiences running, for example, clinics in community and dealing with employment cases, these sorts of experiences are very valuable. So when we go on to implement our own project, we can learn from these past experiences and try to refine.
I think another thing too is that there's a lot of our project relies on experience and kind of anecdotal experience. And even when we were trying to do research for why this project needs to exist, how we can run it, I think the most recent research we found on access to justice was from 2008, produced by the Department of Justice. And so a lot of this experience, I think a lot of academics and their connections through this mentorship has been passed on to us as well, so that we can actually learn a lot more about it rather than just going on Google and finding something from 12 years ago that might not be as relevant.
And then another couple of questions that come through. First of all, one from Sumit, who says, wouldn't some kind of reduction in the regulatory burden, might it expose you to litigation? That's a more general question. I mean, who arranged insurance?
I think in our project, we are very careful that we're not providing legal advice. So what we are focusing on is to build the capacities in NGOs. So what we'll be doing is, for example, write up templates and write up memos so that the NGO staff can look at them as legal information and help assist those in the grassroots community. So we are very conscious that we're not providing legal advice and we are focusing on building the capacity of NGOs. But what we actually also advocate for potential relaxation of the regulatory regime, because we find, like, for example, the previous two's presentation, we have talked about how great students are in producing research results and producing articles. And it doesn't really justify why we can only be great within the law school bubble, but not outside of the law school bubble. So is there, we also understand the policy reasons for this regulatory regime, but is there some balancing act there that can be worked out? And I think the Hong Kong community, especially the legal community, should think about that and be less dismissive with the idea that students or those legally trained, even if they don't have an indemnity insurance, being able to address the access to justice gap. And I think I also addressed that in one of the blog posts, which is on CUHK's learning methods.
Definitely the idea of breaking down the bubble is part of the student as producer philosophy. Here's another question from in the chat. How much time did you devote to the fellowship each term? Did you do much of the work outside term?
So we actually we entered the competition in October of last year, and throughout the past 8 months, we've really been working a lot on writing the pitch proposals. We've entered various competitions and spoken to many NGOs, academics, and also students as well to try and get a lot of the feedback. Because we are all actually full-time students as well, we've taken a lot of our personal time outside of school to work on this project. And ideally, obviously, if this becomes a fully fledged fellowship project, we would like a lot more students to also be a part of this to make it really collaborative as well.
In terms of like hours wise, we would say similar to a proper course in law school in terms of how much time we each spend on it per semester. And so if any of the participants are looking to see, for example, it could be incorporated in the curriculum, that could actually be quite beneficial for students, especially if they're able to develop a project within the actual school curriculum. So that could kind of ease some of their burdens in the class.
And as well, mate, one of the things something that comes out of what you said, perhaps one way that law schools could encourage this kind of project, because you didn't get credit for what you did, academic credit. But if you did, that would help to deal with that problem, wouldn't it? Because then you would be in school and out of school at the same time.
Yeah, I think it also helps that during this past 8 months we are mostly on Zoom, even with the PCL pause. So we're staying at home, so we have like we don't have this traveling time, so we can use that part time to actually Zoom each other to work on this project as well. But yeah, that definitely would be helpful if it's part of the formal curriculum, and that will actually also encourage more students coming out with these projects.
And then another question from Sumit says, can a long-term project be undertaken in A to J, and how would you ensure follow-up?
We are aiming to be a long-term project. The 5 of us we finished our PCLL and hoping to start our traineeship soon. So we hope that in our training we will continue to work on that. But at the same time, we're also trying to hopefully recruit more students to be part of this program. And also when we launch our program, we will recruit also ex-fellows to be part of the team managing and running this program.
And in terms of some of the projects that the fellows will be doing, for example, a case database, it can constantly be updated and be used and transferable for different NGOs who might also be working on labor issues or even adapted to work on different issues like domestic violence as well. And so we hope that these projects won't just be relevant for the 10 months that the fellow is there, but actually can be implanted and used for a much longer period of time, even after the fellows are gone, even after maybe access to justice is gone.
I think if for like a general student that's produced a project, not every project needs to be an annual program, long-term program such as ours, but we have heard other programs such as like holding talks, legal education for elderly people on drafting wills and those kind of like there are various kinds of projects that could be long-term or short-term. So if we hope to bring this model into law schools and probably they only have several years or maybe only 1 year in doing this project, then there is still a flexibility as to the kinds of projects that can be done within a year's time.
They're actually, we've run out of time, I'm afraid. Just to tell you, there is another question that just wants to dig a little bit more into what you said about the mechanism for allowing new fellows to inherit projects. But I'm afraid I just have to leave you to think about that.